Reyes stood with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable as Levi stepped out of the airlock, followed by Erica, Tobias, and the rest of the team. The tension between them was thick, and Levi knew what was coming. Reyes wouldn't let this pass without comment. Well, Reyes said, his voice low and measured. That was fast. Levi met his gaze, refusing to back down. We made contact. Reyes raised an eyebrow. Or provocation? Because I hear you landed on one of their sacred sites? That's not exactly a diplomatic move. Levi clenched his jaw. It wasn't intentional. We didn't know. That doesn't matter. Reyes shot back, his voice hardening. You've stirred the hornet's nest, and now we have to deal with the fallout. Levi opened his mouth to argue, but before he could, Captain Ilara Morrow appeared, her expression unreadable but her presence commanding. She had clearly been informed of the landing, and her face showed the weariness of someone who had been dealing with far too many crises in a short period of time. Ilara, Reyes said, turning to her with a subtle nod. Looks like our friend here decided to take matters into his own hands. Ilara's gaze shifted to Levi, and for a moment the two of them stood in silence, the weight of the situation hanging between them. You disobeyed direct orders, Levi, Ilara said, her voice quiet but firm. We were supposed to wait for a response from the Jethnan. Now you've put us in an even more precarious position. Levi swallowed hard, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He had expected this, but it didn't make it any easier to hear. Still, he refused to back down. I did what I had to do, Levi said, his voice steady. The Jethnan were never going to let us land on their terms. We needed to show them we're serious about survival. Ira's eyes narrowed. By trespassing on their sacred ground, you didn't just take a risk, you made a mistake. A mistake that could cost us everything. Levi's temper flared, but he forced himself to keep his voice calm. We didn't know it was sacred ground, but we survived the encounter and they didn't attack us. That means there's still a chance to negotiate. Ilara stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she turned to Reyes. I'll handle this. Reyes frowned but nodded. I hope you do. Because the fleet's already on edge, and if they find out we've angered the Jethnan, things are going to spiral out of control fast. Ilara watched as Reyes walked away, then turned back to Levi and the rest of the team. Her gaze softened slightly, but the disappointment in her voice was clear. Report to the briefing room. All of you, she said quietly. I want a full debriefing on what happened down there. Levi nodded, his shoulders tense as he followed Ilara into the ship's main corridors. The rest of the team trailed behind in silence, each of them processing the weight of what had just happened. They had landed on Aurelia, but instead of securing a foothold, they had ignited a dangerous spark. The briefing room was small, designed for intimate meetings between senior officers and key personnel. The walls were lined with screens displaying real-time data from the fleet's systems, and a large round table dominated the center of the room. Ilara sat at the head of the table, her fingers tapping lightly on the surface as Levi, Erica, and Tobias took their seats. For a moment, no one spoke. The tension in the room was thick, and Levi could feel the weight of Ilara's gaze on him. She was waiting for an explanation. You disobeyed my orders, Ilara said finally, her voice calm but edged with steel. You were supposed to wait for further instructions, not make a unilateral decision to land on Aurelia. Levi leaned forward slightly, his voice steady but firm. We couldn't wait any longer, Captain. The fleet is on the verge of breaking apart, and the people are losing hope. We needed to show them we could act. Ilara's expression remained neutral, but her eyes flickered with something deeper: exhaustion, frustration, perhaps even fear. And what did you accomplish? You landed on sacred ground, violated the Jethnan's most fundamental beliefs, and put us in even greater danger. Levi bristled but forced himself to remain calm. We made contact. They didn't attack us, which means they're willing to talk. They didn't attack because they're waiting for something. We don't know what. Ilara said sharply. You took a risk that could have cost us everything. Erica, who had been sitting quietly until now, spoke up. We had no way of knowing it was sacred ground. But Levi's right. They could have attacked us, and they didn't. That means there's still a chance to negotiate. Ilara's eyes flicked to Erica, then back to Levi. You've put me in an impossible position. Levi, the fleet is already fragile, and now we have to manage a potential diplomatic disaster. Levi exhaled slowly, his frustration bubbling to the surface. I understand the risks, but we didn't have any other choice. We had to act. Ilara stared at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face for something, an answer, a reason, anything that could make this easier. Finally, she leaned back in her chair, her voice quiet but firm. We'll wait for the Jethnan's response. In the meantime, I'm placing you and your team under temporary suspension. You're not to leave the ship without my express permission. Levi's jaw tightened, but he nodded. He knew better than to argue. He had pushed too far already. Ilara stood, her gaze sweeping over the group. I'll notify you as soon as we have any word from the ex-Jethnan. Until then, stay out of trouble. With that, she turned and left the room, leaving Levi and the others in a heavy silence. Levi wandered the dimly lit corridors of the Exodus, his thoughts a tangled web of frustration, guilt, and uncertainty. The consequences of his actions weighed heavily on his shoulders, but he couldn't shake the feeling that they had done the right thing, at least in principle. They had made contact. They had survived. That had to count for something. But now, as he moved through the ship, he could feel the eyes of the crew on him. Whispers followed him, rumors swirling through the halls like a storm gathering strength. People were scared, confused, angry, and they were looking for someone to blame. Levi knew it wouldn't be long before tensions boiled over. The fleet was a powder keg, and all it would take was one spark to ignite a full-blown crisis. As he turned a corner, he nearly collided with Erica, who had been walking in the opposite direction. She looked just as tense as he felt. Hey, she said, her voice low. How are you holding up? Levi sighed, running a hand through his hair. Not great. But we'll get through this, Erica nodded, her expression softening slightly. I hope you're right. Because if the Exethan don't respond soon, things are going to get a lot worse. Levi didn't have an answer to that. He could feel the storm brewing. And for the first time since they'd arrived in orbit, he wasn't sure if they were going to make it through. Days passed in a thick, uneasy silence aboard the Exodus fleet. It was as though the entire ship held its breath, waiting for the Exethan to make their move. The crew went through their routines with an underlying tension that rippled through the ranks. Conversations were hushed, eyes flickered with uncertainty, and the normally bustling corridors felt colder, more isolated. Captain Elara Morrow sat at her desk, staring at the reports piling up on her console. Supplies were continuing to dwindle, and unrest was beginning to brew among the settlers. The people aboard the fleet had begun to lose hope, their dreams of a new life on Aurelia fading under the weight of uncertainty. But it was more than just the lack of supplies that gnawed at her. It was the silence from the Exethan. Their inaction was as terrifying as any overt threat. The fact that they hadn't responded to Levi's landing, not with diplomacy, nor with force, left everyone on edge. A soft chime from the comm unit broke through her thoughts. Elara leaned forward and pressed the activation switch. Captain Morrow, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. This is Lieutenant Davin, the voice came through. We're receiving a transmission. It's from the Exodus. Elara's heart skipped a beat. She had been waiting for this moment, but now that it had arrived, a cold knot of fear tightened in her stomach. I'll be right there, she said, quickly standing and heading for the bridge. As she walked through the corridors, the ship felt quieter than usual, as if everyone aboard was holding their breath. The crew sensed it. The moment of truth was upon them. The Xethan had finally decided to respond. When Elara arrived on the bridge, Commander Jacob Reyes was already there, standing near the communications console with his arms crossed. His expression was tense but calm, and Elara knew that, despite their differences, he felt the same pressure she did. Lieutenant Davin glanced up from his station. Captain, the message is in the Xethan language. We're running it through the translation system now, but it's long. This isn't just a warning. Elara took her seat, trying to calm the growing anxiety in her chest. Put it on the main screen when it's ready. The bridge fell into a tense silence as the translation software worked to decipher the alien message. Every second felt like an eternity, and Elara couldn't help but wonder what the Xethan were thinking. Were they angry? Were they planning to retaliate? Or had Levi's unsanctioned landing forced them into a reluctant negotiation? Finally, after what felt like hours, the screen flickered to life, displaying the translated text. The voice that accompanied the words was deep and resonant, still carrying the haunting, otherworldly quality of the Exethan language even after translation. This is Vixer of the Exethan High Council. We have observed your actions, and your presence here on Aurelia is both troubling and disruptive. You have violated sacred ground, demonstrating a lack of understanding for our ways and a disregard for our warnings. Elara's breath caught in her throat as the message continued. She could feel the tension in the room rise, the crew hanging on every word. However, the message went on. We understand the desperation of your situation. We are not without compassion. The High Council has deliberated, and we have come to a decision. A decision. Elara leaned forward in her chair, her pulse quickening. This was at the moment they had been waiting for. You will be granted a single audience with the Xethan High Council to present your case. This is your only opportunity to explain your presence and intentions on our world. Be warned, we will not tolerate further disrespect to our lands or our people. Should you fail to demonstrate understanding and respect, we will not hesitate to remove you. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the bridge in a stunned silence. For a long moment, no one spoke. The weight of the message hung over them all like a storm cloud. Elara's mind raced as she processed the implications. They had been given a chance, a slim one, but a chance nonetheless. This was their opportunity to prove that humanity could coexist with the Xethan, that they could live on Aurelia without causing further harm. But the warning was clear. Any misstep in this negotiation could be disastrous. Rise was the first to break the silence, his voice low but steady. It's a trap. Elara glanced at him sharply. You think they're setting us up? Rise nodded, his arms still crossed. They're giving us just enough rope to hang ourselves with. They know we're desperate, and they're betting on us making a mistake. If we go into that meeting without a clear plan, they'll tear us apart. Elara frowned. Or it's exactly what it seems, a chance for us to prove we can live here peacefully, and if they've already decided we can't Riaz countered. If they're just looking for an excuse to wipe us out. Elara fell silent, her mind racing. Rise wasn't wrong. The Xethan had made it clear that they had little tolerance for human presence on their world, and Leva's mistake had only made things worse. But this was the only opportunity they had to secure a future on Aurelia. They had to take it, and they had to be smart about it. We'll need a delegation, Elara said, thinking aloud. We'll go in prepared, with a clear plan. We'll show them that we're willing to work with them, to respect their culture and their land. Reyes gave her a skeptical look. And who's going to lead this delegation? You. Elara straightened, meeting his gaze with quiet determination. Yes, Reyes shook his head. You know they're going to come at you with everything they've got. You'll be walking into a room full of aliens who see us as invaders. I know, Elara said, her voice steady. But if we don't take this chance, there won't be another. This is our only shot at convincing the Xethan that we can coexist. I won't let it slip through our fingers for a moment. Reyes didn't respond. He studied her, his expression unreadable, before finally nodding. All right, but we go in with a backup plan. If things go south, we need to be ready to defend ourselves. Ilara hesitated but then nodded in agreement. We'll prepare for all outcomes, but we're going in with the goal of peace. Reyes didn't argue. Over the next several hours, the command team worked tirelessly to prepare for the meeting with the Jessup. The delegation would consist of Ilara, Reyes, Dr. Malika Mani, and Liara, a Sheathan who had shown a willingness to understand humanity's plight. Liara had been working behind the scenes, quietly advocating for a peaceful resolution, though her influence on the High Council was limited. Still, she had agreed to assist Ilara's delegation, believing that coexistence was possible, even if the road ahead was perilous. Ilara stood in her quarters, reviewing the data she had gathered on the Exethan culture and history. Every detail mattered now. Every word they spoke in that meeting could determine the fate of the entire fleet. Malik had provided her with insights into Aurelia's fragile ecosystem, knowledge that would be crucial in convincing the Ythan that humanity understood the gravity of their presence on the planet. But even as Ilara prepared, the weight of the situation pressed down on her. She knew that this meeting wasn't just about survival, it was about the future of humanity. If they failed here, there would be no second chances. The fleet wouldn't survive much longer in orbit, and they had no other options for relocation. A soft knock at her door pulled her from her thoughts. "Come in," Ilara called, her voice steady despite the anxiety gnawing at her insides. The door slid open to reveal Dr. Malika Mani, his expression calm but tense. He stepped inside, holding a small data tablet in his hand. "Captain," he said, his voice low, "I finished analyzing the latest environmental data from Aurelia. I think we have a stronger case now." Ilara arched an eyebrow. "Go on." Malik handed her the tablet, and as she scanned the data, he explained, "Aurelia's ecosystem is incredibly delicate, more so than we initially thought. But we've identified regions of the planet that could support human settlements with minimal disruption to the environment. If we present this to the Jithan, it could help show them that we're not here to destroy their world, that we're willing to adapt to it." Ilara's eyes scanned the data. It was promising these regions offered a viable solution. They could propose to settle in areas where human impact would be minimized, giving the Exethan fewer reasons to resist their presence. "This could work," Ilara said, her hope renewed. "It shows that we're taking their concerns seriously." Malik nodded, though his expression remained somber. "But it won't be easy. The Zethan are deeply protective of their world. And after what happened with Leva's team, we're walking on thin ice." Ilara set the tablet down and met Malik's gaze. "We have to try." The day of the audience with the Exethan arrived all too quickly. The delegation assembled in the docking bay, the atmosphere thick with tension. The entire fleet seemed to be holding its collective breath, watching as Ilara, Reyes, Malas, and Levi Torin, under orders to stay aboard the ship, watched from a distance, his face set in a hard expression. Ilara knew that despite their differences, he had wanted to be part of the delegation to fix the damage he had caused. But this mission required careful diplomacy, and Leva's approach had already strained their relationship with the Exethan. As the shuttle doors closed and the engines hummed to life, Ilara took a deep breath, steadying herself for what lay ahead. This was their last chance. Whatever happened in that meeting would determine the future of the human race. The shuttle descended toward Aurelia, cutting through the planet's atmosphere with ease. Below them, the alien landscape stretched out in all directions, a patchwork of forests, mountains, and shimmering rivers. It was beautiful and fragile. As they approached the Exethan city, Ilara caught her first glimpse of the alien architecture. The city was unlike anything she had ever seen, organic and flowing, as if the structures had grown from the earth itself. Towering spires rose from the ground, their surfaces covered in intricate carvings that seemed to pulse with a faint ethereal light. The shuttle landed softly in a wide clearing at the edge of the city. As the doors opened, the delegation stepped out onto the soft, mossy ground. The air was cool and fresh, filled with the scent of damp earth and strange alien flora. Waiting for them at the edge of the clearing was a group of Jithan, their tall, slender forms silhouetted against the glow of the city behind them. At the center of the group stood Vixer, the Exethan representative who had delivered the message to the fleet. Vixer stepped forward, his expression unreadable as his gaze swept over the human delegation. "You have come, as requested." Ilara nodded, stepping forward to meet him. "We have." Vixer tilted his head slightly, his voice carrying a quiet authority. "This will be your only opportunity to present your case. Speak carefully, for the fate of your people rests on your words." Ilara's heart pounded in her chest, but she stood tall, her voice steady. "We understand." Vixer nodded once, then gestured for them to follow. And so, the delegation walked into the heart of the Sethan city, knowing that every word they spoke in the coming hours could either save their people or doom them. The Exethan city loomed before them, a blend of organic forms and alien geometry that left Ilara in awe. The towering spires, which appeared to grow straight from the ground, curved and spiraled like the trunks of ancient trees, their surfaces alive with flowing patterns that pulsed in time with the faint hum that seemed to emanate from the very air. This place wasn't just alive, it was a part of the planet itself, a seamless blend of nature and civilization, unlike anything humanity had ever built. Ilara walked at the head of the delegation, with Commander Reyes, Dr. Malakamani, and Liara following close behind. Vixer led them through wide avenues, past intricate stone structures and strange glowing plants, their bioluminescence casting soft light over everything. The Exethan who walked the streets turned to watch the humans pass, their dark, unreadable eyes following the delegation's every move. There was no hostility in their gazes, but there was no warmth either, just quiet observation. As they moved deeper into the city, Ilara felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She knew the stakes. This was the only chance they had to convince the Xithen to allow humanity to settle on Aurelia. If they failed, the Exodus fleet wouldn't last much longer in orbit. Supplies were already stretched thin and unrest was growing among the passengers. There was no other planet they could turn to. Aurelia was humanity's last hope. "Stay close," Ilara murmured to her team, her voice low but steady. "We don't know what to expect." Riaz glanced around, his eyes scanning the towering buildings and the quiet Xithen onlookers. "I don't like this," he muttered. "Feels too much like we're walking into a trap." "We don't have a choice," Malak said quietly. "This is the only chance we've got." Riaz didn't respond, but his tense posture said everything. Liara, the ex-Xithen scientist who had agreed to help bridge the gap between the two species, walked beside them with a calm grace. Her connection to both sides made her a crucial part of the delegation, though Ilara could sense the burden she carried. Liara had risked a great deal to be here, and if this negotiation failed, she would lose more than just her standing with the Xithen. She might lose her home entirely. "The High Council will be cautious," Liara said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "They will test you, probe your intentions. Be patient, and show them respect." Ilara nodded. "We'll follow your lead." Liara, they continued deeper into the city until they reached a grand plaza at the heart of the metropolis. In the center of the plaza stood a massive stone structure that resembled both a temple and a palace, its walls covered in intricate carvings that seemed to shimmer and shift in the light. It was ancient, clearly built long before humanity had ever set foot on this world, and the air around it felt heavy with history and power. "This is the council hall," Vixer said, his voice deep and resonant. "The High Council awaits you inside." Ilara steeled herself as they approached the entrance, the weight of every step growing heavier. She could feel her team's tension, their silent apprehension echoing her own. But this was what they had come for, this moment. This was where they would make their stand. As they entered the hall, the temperature seemed to drop slightly, and the hum of the city outside faded into an eerie silence. The inside of the structure was vast, with high ceilings and walls covered in the same shifting patterns they had seen throughout the city. At the far end of the room, seated on raised platforms made of dark stone, were the members of the Xithen High Council. There were 5 of them, each taller and more regal than the average Xithen they had seen outside. Their exoskeletal forms gleamed in the soft light, and their expressions, if they could be called that, were unreadable behind the smooth masks that covered their faces. They sat in perfect stillness, their dark eyes watching the human delegation with cold, quiet intensity. Vixer stepped forward and bowed his head in respect before taking his place beside the council. "Ilara Morrow, captain of the human fleet," one of the council members said, their voice smooth and melodic, yet laced with an edge of authority. "You stand before the High Council of Aurelia. You have violated our sacred grounds, disregarded our warnings, and yet you come to us seeking refuge. Explain yourselves." The accusation hung in the air like a blade poised to strike. Ilara felt her chest tighten, but she forced herself to remain calm. This was her moment to prove that humanity could be trusted, that they could coexist with the Xithen. She stepped forward, her posture straight and her voice steady. "Honorable members of the High Council, I come before you today not to make excuses, but to offer an explanation. We are a people who have lost our home, our planet destroyed by forces beyond our control. We seek only survival, and we come to you with the deepest respect for your world and your culture." The council remained silent. Their eyes fixed on Ilara, she took a deep breath and continued. "It is true that we have made mistakes," she admitted. "Our landing on your sacred ground was not intentional, and for that we offer our sincerest apologies. We are learning, trying to understand your ways. But I ask you to consider our situation. We have nowhere else to go. We have no desire to harm your world, only to find a place where we can live in peace." For a moment, the council remained silent, their expressions unreadable. Then, one of the members leaned forward slightly, their voice cutting through the air like a blade. "Peace? You speak of peace, yet your actions show recklessness. How can we trust a species that does not understand the sanctity of the land beneath their feet?" Ilara's heart raced. This was the crux of their argument. The Xithen viewed the planet as more than just a home. It was sacred to them, intertwined with their very identity. She had to show them that humanity could change, that they could respect this world as the Xithen did. "That is why we are here," Ilara said, her voice firm but respectful. "To learn from you. We have studied your planet's ecosystems, and we understand now how delicate they are. We do not wish to repeat the mistakes of our past. With the help of your people, we can settle in regions that will have minimal impact on Aurelia's environment. We are willing to adapt, to live in harmony with your world." Dr. Malek Amani stepped forward at her signal, presenting the data he had prepared. "We've identified areas where human settlement can be sustainable without disrupting the balance of the ecosystem. Our technology can allow us to live lightly on the land, using only what we need and giving back where we can. We're not here to dominate, we're here to survive, and we're willing to do so in a way that respects your world." The council remained silent, their dark eyes studying the data that flickered on the screens before them. Ilara could feel the tension in the room rising, but she held her ground, her heart pounding in her chest. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, one of the council members spoke, their voice softer but no less authoritative. "You offer solutions, yet you ask for our trust. Trust is not given lightly, and it cannot be earned through words alone. How do we know you will not destroy this world as you did your own?" Ilara's stomach tightened. This was the hardest question, the one that cut to the core of the Xithen's fear. Humanity's history was one of destruction, of overusing resources, of pushing ecosystems to their breaking points. And now the Xithen had every reason to believe that humans would repeat those mistakes on Aurelia. "We have learned from our past," Ilara said softly, her voice carrying a quiet conviction. "Earth was lost because we didn't listen. We didn't respect the balance of life that sustained us. But that loss has changed us. We understand now what it means to live in harmony with the land, and we are asking for a chance to prove that we can live differently here. With you, silence fell over the room once more. The council members exchanged quiet glances, their dark eyes unreadable. Ilara's heart pounded in her chest, every muscle tense as she waited for their response. Finally, Vixer, who had remained silent for most of the exchange, stepped forward and addressed the council. I have spoken with the humans, learned of their plight. They are desperate, yes, but desperation does not excuse carelessness. However, I believe there is a possibility for peace if they are willing to follow our ways. Ilara held her breath as the council deliberated in low, musical tones that echoed through the hall. She glanced at Malak, who gave her a small nod of encouragement. They had done everything they could, now it was in the hands of the HFY. After several agonizing minutes, the council members finally turned back to the delegation. We have considered your request, the council leader said, their voice cold but measured. We will allow you to settle on Aurelia under strict conditions. You will be confined to specific regions, and your presence will be monitored closely. Any violation of our laws, any disruption to the balance of our world, will be met with swift action. There will be no second chances. Relief washed over Ilara, but she kept her composure. This wasn't a victory, not yet, but it was a lifeline. They had been given the opportunity to prove themselves, to show the Zethan that humanity could coexist with them. It was fragile, but it was hope. Thank you, Ilara said, bowing her head respectfully. We will honor your conditions, and we will work to earn your trust. The council leader's gaze remained fixed on her, unblinking. See that you do. Your future on this planet depends on it.